Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material and cut right to the core of what you need to know. Today, we're embarking on a mission that sounds almost like a philosophical mashup.
It really does.
We're diving into this powerful and really unexpected overlap between ancient Buddhist wisdom, specifically ideas about craving and illusion, and the hardest edge of modern science. We're drawing on sources from evolutionary psychology, neuroscience, and even computational theory.
It's a fascinating convergence.
Our sources today paint a picture of the human mind that is, well, fundamentally, maybe even tragically flawed by its own design. So our mission is to unpack this core dilemma. If natural selection built us to be perpetually dissatisfied, how much control do we actually have over that incessant internal chatter?
That really is the crux of it. The central conflict, especially as you see it in the work of thinkers like Robert Wright, is that natural selection didn't optimize our minds for happiness.
Or even for truth.
Or even for seeing the world as it truly is. Exactly. It designed us for one thing: survival and replication. And, achieving that biological success often requires a level of self-deception and this constant striving. So our task is to figure out scientifically if practices like mindfulness or meditation offer a genuine escape hatch from that evolutionary programming.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. This biological design flaw. Evolutionary psychology has found these surprising parallels with the ancient Buddhist idea of suffering. What are the key evolutionary truths that seem to make us so miserable?
There are really three main ones that mirror Buddhist principles. First, and this is a big one, we are just bad at seeing reality clearly. Our minds constantly distort information. Not because they're broken, but because those distortions are actually useful for quick decision-making, for survival.
So we're not seeing the world, we're seeing a highly edited, like a dramatized movie of the world that serves our own self-interest.
That's a perfect way to put it, exactly. The second truth is that perpetual dissatisfaction, what Buddhism calls dukkha. We anticipate this enduring satisfaction when we achieve a goal. But the moment that goal is met, natural selection instantly pivots us to desire the next thing.
That's the evolutionary driver of the hedonic treadmill.
That's it. You get the promotion, you feel good for a day, maybe a week, and then you're already stressed about the next step up.
It's that moment you cross the finish line only to realize the real prize is just spotting the next mountain to climb.
And the third piece is that craving is structurally tied to our suffering, and it's so often driven by comparison. Our ancestors compared resources, we compare lifestyles on social media, we're always measuring our reality against some idealized version of what we could have.
Or what other people seem to have.
Right.
And this endless mental noise, this craving, is what the Pali tradition labels papanyaka. It's such a brilliant term.
It is.
It means proliferation, illusion, and obstacle, all rolled into one. It describes the mind's almost aggressive tendency to smother any simple experience with just endless commentary.
It's the mind's habit of taking the bare data of cognition, a simple sensation, a sound, the feeling of the chair you're sitting on, and immediately erupting in these waves of mental elaboration.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think of it like this. The sound of a simple rain shower hits your ear. The mind instantly piles on, oh, that reminds me of that vacation, or I should have brought an umbrella, I wonder if the roof is leaking.
It's not just hearing the rain. It's like you're writing a whole screenplay about the rain.
Precisely. The anatomy of papanyaka shows the mind layering itself. Elaboration is based on thought, thought is based on perception, and perception is based on a very simple moment of contact. An organ, an object, an awareness. The goal of mindful meditation is to structurally reverse that process.
To strip it all away.
To strip away the thoughts and the proliferation to get back to just basic awareness where things are, well, tranquil and luminous.
And the sources point out this is often an unpleasant process, right? It's not about finding some flowery tranquility.
Not at all. It's about leaning into difficult feelings like physical pain and accepting them as bare data. If you have a toothache, the mind immediately builds layers of papanyaka. Fear, regret, anger at the dentist.
The whole story.
The whole story. By simply observing the sensation of the pain itself, the emotional attachment in those narrative loops start to weaken. You stop resisting the reality of the moment, which paradoxically lessens its power over you.
So if dissatisfaction and craving are the psychological results, we really need to look at the engine under the hood. To understand this relentless drive, we have to talk about the most primal neurobiological motivator we have, the seeking disposition.
The seeking system is a primary, very ancient emotional brain process. And it's not just about getting the reward, it's what drives the search for the reward. It fuels our explorative behavior, goal-directed activity, and it promotes what you could call anticipatory cognitions.
What does that feel like?
It's that feeling of positive excitement, what researchers call appetitive eagerness.
And where does this system live in the brain?
It's orchestrated by the mesolimbic dopamine system. And the key insight here is that dopamine isn't really the pleasure chemical we always hear about.
It's the wanting chemical.
That's a much better way to put it. It's the wanting chemical. Phasic dopamine release happens whenever we encounter something new, something salient, or something that predicts a future reward. It's the compulsion to move, explore, and find the next thing.
Wait, so you're telling me the evolutionary drive for perpetual dissatisfaction and the Buddhist concept of craving are literally powered by the same ancient dopaminergic system?
Absolutely. The dopamine system ensures you are always looking ahead, always eager for the next experience, which basically ensures you are never truly satisfied with your present state.
And if this system is the source of all our motivation, what happens when it malfunctions? What are the clinical links?
We see two major extremes that really highlight its role. On one side, in cases of depression, there is often reduced seeking activity.
So the system is underactive.
It's a failure of the system to generate that appetitive eagerness, and that leads to low motivation and anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure or find things worthwhile. Then on the other side, addiction is characterized as a pathological hyperexcitability of the seeking disposition. This is the incentive sensitization hypothesis. Hijacked.
So environmental cues, a drug, a behavior, they gain this exaggerated attractive power.
Exactly. And the system becomes pathologically sustained, compelling the person to seek that thing above everything else.
So whether you have too little of the drive or the drive is pathologically diverted, the end result is suffering. The biological engine designed to keep us alive is also the engine designed to keep us wanting.
It's a profound conflict built into our biology.
Which brings us to a huge question. If our brains are designed for this constant striving, where does the potential for an objective perspective, the ability to step back and just observe the craving, where does that actually come from? To explore this, we need to turn to Antonio Damasio's theory of consciousness.
Damasio takes a really refreshing, holistic view. For him, consciousness isn't just a computational function of the cerebral cortex, it's an embodied process. It involves the whole organism, from the immune and endocrine systems all the way to the gut microbiome.
Wow.
And the core purpose of consciousness, in his model, is homeostasis.
Maintaining internal stability.
Yes, keeping the system in balance. Consciousness evolved to help the organism survive.
So how does he layer this internal experience into what we call the self?
He describes a three-layered hierarchy. The foundational layer is the proto-self. This is the most basic, and it's an unconscious representation.
Unconscious.
Right. It's an always-on map of the body's current physiological state. This is your brainstem constantly tracking heart rate, temperature, resource levels. It's the silent machine. Building on that, you get core consciousness. This emerges when the organism becomes consciously aware of the changes happening to its internal state.
So that's the feeling.
It's the instantaneous realization of, I am thirsty, or I am cold. It provides a momentary sense of self, concerned only with the immediate here and now. Damasio famously defines this as the feeling of knowing a feeling.
That is a profound definition. But if consciousness is just the feeling of knowing a feeling, how does that help us manage craving? Isn't the feeling of craving also just another feeling we passively know?
That's where the third layer comes in, and this is why it's so important for agency. The final layer is extended consciousness. This moves beyond the present moment. It relies heavily on memory, on language, and higher thought to form your cohesive autobiographical self.
My life story.
Your life story, your identity, your plans for tomorrow. The core self is the feeling of being hot and thirsty now. The extended self is you thinking, I'm thirsty because I forgot my water bottle yesterday, and I must remember to pack 2 for the hike tomorrow because I have a goal of completing that hike.
So it's a narrative we build around the feeling.
Exactly. And that narrative is critical for long-term self-regulation and goal setting.
Okay, so we have this autobiographical self, the driver of the car, sitting on top of the whole system. If we have consciousness and this robust sense of self, why is self-control so incredibly difficult? Let's look at this concept of mental autonomy, or M-autonomy, which radically challenges our subjective feeling of being in the driver's seat.
Well, research from people like Thomas Metzinger suggests that much of what we call conscious thought is primarily subpersonal automatic behavior, like a highly sophisticated computer just running on its default settings. The startling finding is that for roughly 2/3 of our conscious lives, we are not mentally autonomous subjects. We're on autopilot.
2/3, wow.
M-autonomy is the capacity for goal-directed self-control over your mental functions. And the most important capacity for this discussion is veto control,
The ability to stop something.
the intentional ability to inhibit, suspend, or terminate an ongoing mental process.
Which means mind-wandering is the ultimate failure state of M-autonomy. We've all been there. Stuck scrolling on the couch, or caught in a loop of rumination about something embarrassing you said 10 years ago. You know you should stop, but you can't just snap out of it.
That's the perfect example. Mind wandering is highly automatic. It involves an unnoticed loss of mental self-control, and it's often linked to the default mode network, the DMN. The system is just fully immersed in an inner narrative, and the driver, the autonomous self, has temporarily collapsed.
So how does the driver get back in the seat?
To regain control, the system has to instantiate something called the epistemic agent model, or EAM. The EAM is a very specific, conscious self-representation that models you as an entity actively constructing and controlling your own knowledge and thoughts. A mind-wandering episode is basically a collapse of the EAM.
But here is the paradox of agency that our sources highlight. When you regain that M-autonomy, when you finally manage to snap out it during meditation or just refocus, it subjectively feels like an act of epistemic self-causation. It feels like, I did that. I directed my attention.
That feeling is crucial, but our sources suggest it contains a confabulatory element.
Oh, what?
A confabulatory element. It's an adaptive self-deception. When we regain control, the system instantly generates a narrative that says, I intended to do that, to ensure the coherence of the autobiographical self. We need that little fiction to preserve our identity as an autonomous agent who is, generally in charge. It's a useful lie we tell ourselves.
So we have a mind designed for dissatisfaction, fueled by the seeking drive, largely running on subpersonal autopilot, and relying on a kind of an adaptive self-deception to feel in control. This raises the ultimate philosophical challenge. How do we define genuine biological agency that separates us from, say, highly sophisticated machines like modern AI?
The computational framework gives us a pretty clear answer by looking at the generative process. We need to distinguish between structural self-organization and teleological self-organization.
Okay.
Systems that rely on structural organization, like large language models, they perform complex internal processes. But their goal is always to minimize the divergence from an externally specified objective or reward function.
So they're smart, but they're always following instructions to optimize for an external metric, someone else's metric.
Exactly. Biological systems, on the other hand, exhibit teleological self-organization. They autonomously construct their own constraints around self-maintenance, around survival and metabolic organization. This fundamental self-generated goal, just staying alive, creates an organizational distinction from anything external. And that distinction is the hallmark of true biological agency.
And the proof of this biological distinction is what's called the internal gap.
Yes. The internal gap is the constant divergence between what the system anticipates it needs for survival and its realized state. In biological systems, this gap is the essential error signal that drives self-regulation. If you're cold, the gap between your anticipated ideal temperature and your current temperature drives you to find warmth. And what's fascinating is that even regulatory failure like chronic fatigue or anxiety, where the system persistently misses its anticipated state, it still proves agency.
How so?
Because the persistent existence of that gap marks a structured teleological organization that is constantly striving, constantly diverging from just passive mechanics.
And here it is. The ultimate connection, back to the sources we started with. The Buddhist goal of letting go of craving and reducing papiññeca is fundamentally about managing that internal gap. It's not about eliminating anticipation, which is impossible.
Right. But it's about changing your relationship to the divergence between what you anticipate and what you realize. It's the practical application of this whole convergence. By managing that gap, by letting unpleasant realities just be, rather than letting the mind create narratives of how they shouldn't be, you weaken their power. Agency is ultimately defined by the capacity to sustain an autonomous, self-referential loop. A persistent divergence between your intrinsic becoming and any external description. That capacity is maximal in us, in humans who construct these reflective self-narratives.
So we started with the idea that nature programmed us for perpetual striving and dissatisfaction, a state powerfully reinforced by this primal seeking system and expressed as involuntary mind-wandering. We found that true mental control, autonomy, is a rare, complex act that requires the conscious, albeit fleeting maintenance of ourselves as an intentional agent.
And our deep dive into the generative view of agency suggests that the goal isn't necessarily perfect regulation, that's impossible, but the maintenance of that autonomous self-referential loop, the gap itself. Whether we're looking at ancient meditation or modern neurobiology, escaping the misery of craving means learning how to manage the difference between what we want or anticipate and what simply is.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on. If your entire subjective experience of control, that feeling of actively making a decision to stop daydreaming or redirect your attention, is often an adaptive neurological illusion, a confabulation built specifically to preserve your self-identity, does knowing this fundamental design flaw make it easier or harder to achieve genuine mental autonomy? We'll leave you with that.